So did the Aaron Rodgers thing reopen or not, or what's going on here? I can't blame you if you're confused. Welcome to the Locked On Vikings podcast.
You are Locked On Vikings, your daily Minnesota Vikings podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What's up, everybody? Welcome to the Locked On Vikings podcast, where we're always trying to learn something new. It's part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Thank you so much for making Locked On Vikings your first listen of the day every single day. I appreciate my hashtag everydayers so very much. Y'all make the world go round. I don't feel great about our chances to learn something new today because we have to talk more about the Aaron Rodgers thing. Look, I don't want to do this. I had a whole show planned about Javon Hargrave. If we have some time at the end, I'll go into some of that. Otherwise, there's a Patreon video at patreon.com/LukeBraunNFL, and I'll circle back. I'll do a show about it another time, maybe tomorrow, maybe next week. I won't waste that prep, but Kwesi had a press conference. Like 65% of it was about Aaron Rodgers, and the conclusions that you may draw, depending on where you get your information, will differ wildly. If you're the kind of person that will block out all headlines and analysis and whatever, soundbitey stuff that you will find from podcasts and blogs and stuff like this and stuff like the newspaper and all that, and you just watched it, you're going to have a totally different idea than if you read headlines. Here are some headlines that I found. On NFL.com, the headline is Vikings GM Kwesi Adofo-Mensah discusses talks with Aaron Rodgers, JJ McCarthy's path to starting. Yahoo Sports, Vikings GM sends strong message on Aaron Rodgers' pursuit. CBS Sports, Aaron Rodgers' future, Vikings GM doesn't rule out more talks with QB, but happy with JJ McCarthy, quote, right now. Good old Mike Florio goes the direct route. Kwesi Adofo-Mensah doesn't rule out a pursuit of Aaron Rodgers. Sports Illustrated, Vikings reopen door to steal Aaron Rodgers from Steelers. That one gets the prize from me. So if you just Googled it and you found all those headlines, you might start to get a sense that the Vikings are maybe changing their mind on this. That the report we got last week from Tom Pelissero that they were out on this was either false, or that maybe something has changed, or that it wasn't the whole story or something like that. And that Vikings Aaron Rodgers is still the big story of the offseason. And man, that's not what dude said. What is in the headlines becomes what is the truth. That's just a thing of media, just a truism of media. And when it doesn't match what I think the real truth actually is, I get really frustrated, and I know the reason for that. It's a profit deal. Everyone's fighting for clicks. Welcome to the digital age. I get it, but I guess what I want to do today is for you and me, dear listener, to try to rise above that level. I'm not even going to call it of misinformation, but of misleading information. To not get misled today. Let's not be gullible today, and instead, let's listen to the freaking quotes. I've got an editing software. I can just pull them out and show them to you. So that's what I'm going to do. We're going to listen to the quotes today. So we'll start with the Aaron Rodgers thing. And what I want you to do is keep in mind that if you Googled this, you get this idea that Aaron Rodgers is still very much on the table. So he was asked, what's the deal with Aaron Rodgers? Why were you looking into him? Here is what he had to say.
I'll always say is it's our job as a personnel group to make sure we're aware of every potential option. And again, we're trying to make sure we solve for scenarios that we don't know could possibly happen. We want to make sure that there's competition in the room to make sure that if you remember last offseason when JJ and Sam were really competing, that brought the best out of both of them. And so you want an environment that's like that, a supportive environment to also just challenge each other but grow and learn and all those different things. And so we're trying to solve for a lot of different things at once. And from all those conversations comes a list of names and maybe an order and an intentional plan on how to best solve for those things. So, a player like him, he's always going to be in those conversations. But, from our delineations at that time, we're happy with where we are going forward. But, obviously the caliber of player and just, all our situations, we had to make our considerations.
So if you hadn't seen all those headlines, to me, that sounds like a past tense autopsy on why you decided to look into this idea that many find outlandish. A perfectly fair thing to have to answer for, and I think his answer made a lot of sense. Competition's important, covering the unknowns is important. What if JJ McCarthy gets hurt? What if he's in training camp and he's not as good as he was last year? What if he shows up out of shape or something like that? There's all kinds of what ifs you can't do anything about. And no matter how good you feel about JJ McCarthy, which Kwesi had a lot of praise for JJ McCarthy that may or may not, might not end up getting included in this episode, but he had it. You can go listen to it for yourself. And by the way, if you think that I was deceptive in any way about how I pulled these clips out, go ahead and listen to yourself and let me know. I tried my best not to be. I tried to just grab the crux of the answer, the best that I understood what he was trying to say. That was what I tried to do. If you think I was being deceptive, I apologize, but I'm trying really hard not to be part of that same problem, which is why I'm giving you 45-second clips rather than singular sound bites or tweets, right? So anyways, later in the presser, he was asked this.
How did it end with Rodgers? Was it his choice, your choice, that it wasn't going to fit?
I think we got to a place where we just said everybody was transparent, but right now we feel good about where we're going, and that's really how it ended. It's ultimately up to him. It's hard to talk about a player who's not under contract for our team and who plays for obviously isn't a member of this team. It's ultimately up to him what he decides to do with his future, but that's kind of where we left it. I know Kevin and him have a great relationship still. They'll still have a relationship. They'll keep talking but right now I'm focused on the two players that are in our room right now and in my personnel process for going forward.
Again, sounds very past tense, doesn't it? It's very this thing was over. So the idea that you might get from the headlines that this isn't over really does not match up with the tone of these answers. It sounds very done. This is why we didn't do it, right? This is where it ended. We determined that we liked where our room was at and we decided to move forward with that. And taking this and twisting it because he said the words right now, to me, is either outright deceptive just for the sake of keeping a clickbaity story alive, or just a gross misunderstanding of tone. The kind of thing that a sociopath that can't understand when someone is sad or happy and can't read faces would do. I feel like it's almost more charitable to go with the former. And this is what bugs me, I guess. I wish that the truth was more important. To me, the truth is important, or at least my best guess at the truth, because I don't always get to know it. Sometimes I have to speculate. Sometimes the truth is subjective and we can argue about it. And I think that's beautiful. But right now in this story, it has never been more apparent how unimportant the truth is. And that is not a blanket statement on everybody, right? I think there are a lot of members of the media, Star Tribune in particular, that I think have done a very good job of being deferential to the truth, the real truth, trying their best to get the real truth. And I appreciate that deeply. And I wish everybody else was a little more like them. But so the answer to that question of how did this end, to me, if you were to try to paraphrase that for yourself, what would you say that answer was? Well, it was that they decided they were good right now. Later, this happened.
Can you say definitively then the door is closed with Rodgers? It kind of sounds like ultimately it was his decision and we're still looking for a veteran quarterback. Can you say that door is...
I don't know that it was ultimately, I don't know that I said it was ultimately his decision. I don't want to make sure that, I think that I said that given where we are scenario-wise, we didn't think it was the right move at this time. It is also his decision to whether he signs with another team, not. That's ultimately up to another player. For me to sit here and say that, anything's 100% forever, that's just not the job, right? We're responding to scenarios and different information as it comes. So, obviously things can change, but right now we're really happy with our room and we're going to look to upgrade it in different ways. But for now, we're really excited.
That reporter there, I believe that was Dawn Mitchell of Fox 9. She's not somebody that I think very often is going for the flamey headline thing. I think she was just genuinely asking a clarifying question and had a stranger, because his answer was a little bit weirdly worded. So I think that was just a clarification that was needed, but that's important, right? Okay. So now we have a clear story here. And if you think Kwesi's just lying about everything, then sure. But we have a clear story here. Aaron Rodgers approaches the Vikings. They consider it because it would be kind of malpractice for them not to consider these kinds of options. You got to think about it, right? Or you're not really doing your job. They think about it. They decide they're okay with their room. They tell him, no, thank you. They leave the door open just in case someone gets hurt or something unforeseen happens. He spent a lot of this presser talking about unforeseen, about, kind of not knowing what you don't know. But ultimately, they were the ones that told him no right now, and now it's up to him whether or not he goes and signs with the Steelers or another team, or he stays by his cell phone and waits for the Vikings to call in the event that circumstances change. But that is the crux of this to me, that yes, the idea of Aaron Rodgers on the Vikings is not 0%, and it probably will never be. How can you ever say never, right? It's football. Stranger things happen all the time. But that it would require a change in circumstance. Something new needs to be added to this equation. As it stands now, it's JJ McCarthy, it's Brett Rippon, it's whoever else they add. If something changes, like a player getting injured or a weird trade offer coming in for some other quarterback or something like that, then maybe they revisit the idea. But that's where it's at right now. So if you want that clarity, that's that clarity. And you make whatever you want to make of that, but that is where we are at. Until something changes, the Aaron Rodgers Vikings thing is over. Something has to change, and I don't know what that thing would be or how likely it is. There were some other questions in this one, though, that I want to go over kind of in the same way, some other news stories that you might hear like deceptive stuff about, and I just want to be like really clear about it. So let's continue this exercise next on Locked On Vikings. Today's episode of Locked On Vikings is brought to you by Gametime, the best place to find last-minute tickets. And hey, if you live near where there's perhaps some college basketball being played, or if you just want to get a head start, of course, the schedule is going to be released in a month or so. If you want to get a head start on grabbing your Vikings tickets, if you want, or if you're just looking for something to do on the weekend, Gametime's curation makes it easier to find better value for tickets to sports, concerts, comedy, theater, and everything else. It's super easy to find, like there's super deals. There's like a red big flame thing that's like shows the best deal that you can find. And if it's not the best deal on the market, Gametime will credit you 110% of the difference if you find the same section and row for less. Download the Gametime app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONNFL for $20 off your first purchase. That's LOCKEDON NFL for $20 off. Download Gametime today. Last minute tickets, lowest price, guaranteed. Thank you so much for making Locked On Vikings your first listen of the day. When you're done here, hey, go check out Locked On NFL Draft. About that time of year, folks. A follow-up to all this Aaron Rodgers stuff was a response to the quote we talked about yesterday from JJ McCarthy. He went on the Up and Adams show with Kay Adams, an interview at a golf course, and said that the Vikings hadn't told him that he was QB1. So Kwesi was asked about that. Hey, why didn't you do that? And here was his answer.
You guys all talk in terms of QB1 and all those conversations, different things like that. When we pull the resources we did to draft JJ, and you go through that long process and all those things, I can't stand up here and say that's the outcome we want, and that's the outcome we're headed towards. At every checkpoint, whether it been the draft process or practice until the injury, or really the offseason now, he's met the bar. I mean, he's exceeded our expectations at every point. And so I don't have the ability to tell you what the future is, but I can tell you what I expect to be the outcome this offseason from the competition. But it's also our job to set up a quarterback room that's going to have, be able to meet, have great ideas, and prepare whoever it is to play, but also provide, insurance in case somebody needs to come in for a couple games. And that's our job as a personnel department to look at all the options out there and make sure we're setting ourselves up for the best case we can.
So again, just taking Kwesi's words at their value, I think he makes a pretty good point, and I think that's a satisfactory answer to the question. There is stuff that's yet to happen. The room is not finished. And while we can we can think probabilistically, we would say, JJ McCarthy's minus 10,000 to be, if you want to use like betting odds, minus 10,000 to be QB1 is probably an accurate assessment. But man, I don't know. What if the Ravens are like, hey, you want to trade for Lamar Jackson and you want to? Like, what if that happens? You don't know. I'd remember Kyle Shanahan a couple years ago had that famous quote. He's like, I don't know if I'm going to wake up this Sunday. Like, what if I have an aneurysm in my sleep and it's over? Like, you don't know that kind of stuff. So GMs drape everything in caveats. They have to, because you don't want to go up on the podium and say, Josh Rosen is our guy, and then something happens. You end up with the first overall pick, and you go with Kyler Murray. You don't want to say that before you really know. You end up somewhere where a different guy ends up playing for you. You don't want to have egg on your face. Even if you expect that to happen, You can't predict the future. And I think we're at a crossroads here. If you can't accept that reality, that you can be really excited about JJ McCarthy, but still be, cognizant of the fact that you can't predict the future. If you think that mentality means they secretly hate him, I can't help you. We're probably at a crossroads, and honestly, this probably isn't the show for you, because I think we're trying to stay in the realm of reality a little bit more. If JJ McCarthy is 99% likely to be the QB1, I'm not going to stress over the 1%. But I think Kwesi made a pretty good point about, it wasn't in this particular quote because I thought it was a little bit frivolous, but he did also say that, like, I don't know if anybody does that in March, which I think he's right about, but also that, like, he has to cover those bases. If someone gets hurt, you have to bring somebody in. And it makes very little sense to even decide on a depth chart. Even if the answer is obvious, you're not really going to write that down until the room is complete. So everything is draped in caveats. And to understand to glean any information out of a GM press conference, you kind of have to say, you have to appreciate that the caveats are an automatic thing and look at what he's saying underneath them all. And then just appreciate that he covered his bases in case something weird happens that nobody saw coming. Because, it's football. It's the NFL. Something weird always happens that nobody saw coming. And if you're not ready for that, you're being an idiot. Later on, one of the other big themes of this presser was Kwesi Adolfo-Mensah's contract situation. So Kevin O'Connell has already signed his, Kwesi has not. That's a little bit unusual for the Vikings, who like to keep the coach and the GM in one package. The Wilfs have operated that way since it was Mike Zimmer and Rick Spielman, that they were on the same contract. They were in sync, so they would be a team. And right now, O'Connell is on a big extension. Kwesi's in the last year of a deal. So he was asked about that, and here's what he had to say.
Why hasn't your deal been done?
Man, it's funny. I don't think about that very much, I'll be honest. I'm wired. This is probably the busiest time of year for myself and my staff. And so I wake up every morning trying to make sure the Vikings get to the ultimate goal I want to get us to. So when I somebody will say it in passing, I'll make sure I call Jimmy and ask him how it's going and all that stuff. But, just like what we say with player contracts, it's a process. These things take time. A contract is a chance for people to come together at a table and find solutions for the things that they want to solve for. So that's what we do. I trust people to do that for me. I promise you I don't wake up thinking about that for 1 second. I wake up thinking about how do we improve this team? How do we beat the other teams in our division?
There was a follow-up question about if he was jealous of Kevin O'Connell's security that I thought was kind of dumb. But at the end of that answer, there was this.
I know the Wilfs value the things I bring to this organization. I know I love it here. We've been able to accomplish a lot of different things. Started my family here. Minnesota will be a part of my story forever. So I don't really think about those things, I'll be honest, on a day-to-day basis.
So again, let's try to take what he actually said. What do you think his mentality for this is? I don't know, man. Dude's busy. It seems to me that Kwesi Adolfo-Mensah just isn't really worried about it yet. And it's a process, like he said, right? Any contract negotiation is a process. And as part of a contract negotiation, I don't know if you've ever been in a contract negotiation, maybe depending on what your job is and if there was a contract as an involvement of that. But part of that, ideally, is reading the thing. Take some time. And if you're working on free agency, draft, doing a whole bunch of stuff, you might not have time for that. And it's not like there's a deadline on this that's pressing or coming up or anything like that. So again, to me, seems like pretty much a non-story. And I am deeply annoyed that we are a full almost 20 minutes into this podcast and we haven't talked about anything that anyone's going to think about in 2 months from now. It bugs me. Okay, remember when everybody was really worried about Kevin O'Connell getting traded? Do you? Or don't you? Because it's totally, when's the last you heard about that? He signed his contract and it was over, right? Same thing's going to happen here. But then there was this question, which I thought was a bit of a tipping point in this presser where it got a little bit testy.
Is it odd, though, that you're planning and making moves for the future, whether the draft and free agency, and you only have 1 year left on your deal?
I think when you sit down in a conversation with me and interview me and you get to know me, the person I am, integrity-wise, I don't think you'd ever question whether I do the right thing by the organization for the future. And I think they continue to trust that. If you spend time with me every day, I'm not perfect. I have my flaws, but willingness to do the right thing by the organization is not one of them.
I thought that was a funny little interaction. I mean, he's had to like clarify a quote from getting out of context, like in the middle of the interview. And now he's got to say like, wait, what do you mean? Of course, I'm going to try to get good players for the team for the future. I don't know who that reporter is. And to be fair to that reporter, I don't think he necessarily meant that in an accusatory way, but that's clearly how Kwesi took it. The idea that, well, if you're on a 1-year deal, are you just going to like overvalue the short term because, you only have 1 year left and you're on a prove it deal. And he's essentially parrying that accusation away. But again, I don't think that he is somebody on a prove it deal. It's very clear that a contract is being worked on and is going to get done at some point. He's like, do you not think so? Like, I want somebody who doesn't think so to like look me in the eye and tell me why they hear this kind of discussion. Well, we're all having positive dialogue. We're working on it, but I'm really busy, so I haven't been able to get around to it. How you take that and in your like brain warp it into, oh my God, he's not going to sign a contract. To me, you sound insane. And I would love it if we could all try to be a little less insane. That's the insane stuff. But I do want to end on a little bit more of a productive note. There were a couple of answers from that presser that I actually found to be really interesting. Questions that had nothing to do with the headline of the hour or whatever the heck Mike Florio is writing about. Stuff that I actually think is informative and helps you deepen your understanding of the Vikings. That's what I want to do today. That's what I want to do with this podcast every day. So let's try to sneak one of those in at the end. And I'll put the Javon Hargrave thing off to another day. That'll be next on Locked On Vikings. Moving on with the Locked On Vikings podcast. If I had my druthers, if I were, a head editor at a major Minneapolis newspaper, pick your one of them. For me, the most telling thing, the most newsy item thing that came out of that Kwesi presser was really, to me, just confirmed what we knew about Aaron Rodgers. They thought about it. They said no. He confirmed what we already know about his contract, that they are working on it. And he confirmed what we kind of knew about J.J. McCarthy, that he's very likely to be QB1, but obviously weirder things can happen. But very glaringly, the Vikings only have 2 quarterbacks under contract, and one of them is like not a guarantee to make a 53-man roster in Brett Rippon. Kwesi might disagree with me on that, but we'll see what happens when push comes to shove. So he was asked about that.
Did you like quarterbacks? Do you still plan or need to add another veteran like before the offseason starts?
Yeah, we're looking at all our options. There's a lot of good players out there still. We've have the dynamic where we're trying to improve the team, but mindful of our compensatory pick situation and different things like that. So we're really just trying to be mindful of that and the right way to set us up to succeed, but also be mindful of all the different factors we have to.
Aha! He said the thing. Mindful of the compensatory pick situation. I've been covering this in great detail this year, probably more detail than you need, but I've been having fun with it, so whatever. It's like a fun little puzzle to think about. Ooh, who can they sign and what will they count as? So very importantly, Aaron Rodgers would not count as a compensatory free agent. So if they're waiting for the compensatory situation to change, which after the draft, if they sign a backup quarterback after like Drew Lock, let's say, after the draft, he will not count toward the compensatory formula, even though he's a guy whose contract expired, he normally would count. They sign him today, he would count. They sign him on May 6th, he won't count. So they could be waiting on that, and there usually is like kind of a second mini little wave of free agency right after the draft for that reason in particular. So if they're waiting for a guy like that, well, then they surely are not looking at Aaron Rodgers because this isn't they don't have to wait for Aaron Rodgers. If they wanted Aaron Rodgers at the building, they could do it now. They have told him no. He told us that. They have told him no. They said, keep your phone on, but it's a no. But I have theorized on this show before, and so I feel a little vindicated knowing that, okay, they haven't signed a backup quarterback because of the comp pick formula. I thought it was that they were waiting for Cam Robinson to get signed. He did get signed. I guess they're being a little greedier about it. They're trying to keep 2 comp picks, more power to you. And I'll be honest, I think it might be till after the draft that we see a backup quarterback come into the building. He was also asked about, like, finally, there were some questions about the other free agents, and he was asked about the kind of the process of finding them. And I actually thought this was a really interesting answer and an insight into his mindset.
How many of your plan A's were executed, even going back to Aaron Jones a few days before free agency officially?
Yeah, a lot of our plan A's, but it's hard because it's almost like a play call. You have a package play. There's a play and an audible off of it. So, if you don't get this thing, it's because you're really excited about these other 3 things you could get. So, if I take your question the way I think you're asking it, we were successful in doing a lot of our planning, but some of that was related to, hey, we have this audible that we like almost as much as plan A.
I genuinely find that to be an interesting, like, strategy thing, right? I think back to last offseason. It was widely reported that the Vikings were interested in Christian Wilkins. They ended up losing out on that bidding war, and then they grab Andrew Van Ginkel and Jonathan Grenard for about the same AAV. You'll have to check me on that. I don't remember just how close it was, but if I recall, it was like we were going to spend a ton of money on Christian Wilkins, or we're going to sort of split it into 2 guys we think are pretty good in Grenard and Van Ginkel. Obviously, the Grenard Van Ginkel thing worked out like gangbusters. That was their plan B. But I say on this show all the time, there's a lot of ways to skin a cat. And I mean that. I mean, there are a lot of different good answers to a free agency problem sometimes. You could grab this guy. If you don't get him, you can go for that guy. Obviously, Kwesi's not going to tell us who was plan A or plan B because nobody can be normal about a quote. So he can't say that stuff. But here we are. And I guess the reason I'm doing the show the way that I'm doing it is because is out of pure frustration with the way that we treat the holders of knowledge. I can't think of a better term for that. The stakeholders as a community, as media. And, I feel very much a part of both of those machines. And so I want to kind of talk to both of those machines. We have to try our best to be normal. Kwesi talks with nuance. He says, we really like JJ McCarthy, but we got to make sure we got our ducks in a row and that we're set up for, contingencies if things go wrong. And if you heard somebody say that in a conversation, if you heard them say that about buying a house, right? Well, we love this house. We just got to, put the money in escrow. We got to make sure that there's no termites in it. It would be a completely insane person thing to look at that and say, well, you must not really like that house that much. What? No, that's not what I said at all. That's a whole new idea, and it's on the complete opposite of the spectrum of where I'm at. What are you talking about? Well, if you like that house so much, why don't you just buy it now without the escrow? Like, who would do that? That's insane. And I feel like I'm having that conversation with people, and I feel like I've been having that conversation with people like all day, which is why I'm doing it this way. Like, here's the freaking quote. He said the thing. And I really wish we could take a GM or a coach or a player on what they said, how they said it, and try to discern what they meant rather than just picking out the words that are the best. I will leave you with this. I don't usually cover all the pressers. The free agents all did a whole bunch of introductory press conferences, including Jordan Mason. Jordan Mason was very short with the media, not in a combative way. He was literally just very precise, concise with everything he said. A lot of short answers. And boy, I cannot blame him because he went through a situation in San Francisco where he was the golden boy for a minute because he was the backup running back. He had a great first couple of games. And then it was the first game. He had a phenomenal game on Monday Night Football. He went up on the podium after that game to the cheers and the flowers and the compliments. And then they asked him, when did you know that you were going to get the start? He said, Friday. Well, it turned out that was possibly a violation of injury reporting rules around Christian McCaffrey. And it was a whole thing. And he got in trouble for it. And what a disillusioning thing. And a beautiful microcosm of this systemic issue, which is why I'm not calling anybody out by name today, okay? If you think I'm calling you out by name, you're wrong. This is the whole apparatus, because the same crap happens everywhere else, is so hardwired to make everything as inflammatory as possible that it becomes genuinely impossible to get informed by the people who are meant to inform you. You just have to do it yourself. And I don't want you to have to do it yourself. I want to do it for you, but I want to do it in a way that actually gets you informed and doesn't just get you inflamed. I'll talk to y'all tomorrow. Maybe it's 4-0 Friday if he's available. Otherwise, we'll talk about Javon Hargrave. And as always, Skol.